Yaneer, it's a great pleasure to welcome you to this session. Yaneer Bar-Yam was trained at the MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and started the New England Complex Systems Institute a number of years ago, and has also started a website more than a year ago called stopcoronavirus.org, which is now discussing the zero COVID concept in quite some detail. Yaneer is an amazing international personality in this field and has really organized many different interactions between scientists and so on. So Yaneer, welcome to the session, and please start talking about zero COVID and discuss it from your perspective. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Let me just say, it's not stop coronavirus, it's end coronavirus. So if you're looking for it, you'll be able to find it. That's okay. I think the key point is that there was a mistake that was done about a year ago at the beginning of the pandemic. And it's mostly that simple. The mistake was that people assumed that once a virus got someplace, that you could not eliminate it. And the answer is we know that we can. And that the fact that we can creates this choice of strategy options. Do we go for elimination, or do we try to what's called live with a virus? And the live with a virus option has clearly not worked. It has resulted in a nightmare year of suffering, of severe disease, of people not being able to breathe and dying in terrible context, being alone in hospitals, and not being able to receive effective treatment because there is not sufficient treatment. And eventually those who do survive, many of them suffer from long COVID with long-term disability that, as far as we know, may last lifetimes and surely will affect a huge number of people that have been infected by this disease, whether they have been infected severely or even they've been infected mildly or asymptomatically. And this is true. We know now at all ages, even children who have been infected can suffer from long COVID symptoms over the short term, and long term, as far as we know, biological harm that is something to be horrified at in terms of the long-term significance of what has been done over the past year. Now, the alternative approach of elimination has been done. And in fact, about a quarter of the world's population today lives in a condition where they don't have the disease locally. They have family events, they have the ability to get together for barbecues, go to restaurants, go to rock concerts, and it's beginning in the rest of the world to have all this almost mythical idea of the year and a half ago reality where we didn't have to be worried about this disease. But the people who are in those countries, and that includes large countries like China, small countries, island countries, but also Australia, New Zealand, Vietnam, Singapore, Thailand, Taiwan, and a part of Canada, Atlantic Canada, and the Northern Territories. And we've seen that this is possible. And the question is how and why has this been this choice? And again, part of it is just a mistake, this mental model, the idea in the mind that once the horse has left the barn, we cannot stop it. And it's not true. We should think about the coronavirus infection like a fire. It's something that we can put out, but we cannot put it out part way. If we put it out part way, it just rebounds. So we have to do it with intention. And so what we find is that when we don't intend to eliminate it, we surely will not be successful in eliminating. But if we intend to eliminate it, we can identify the steps that are necessary and be successful. And we can talk about what the steps are. And one of them, which is super important, is to protect areas that have achieved elimination. And this is a standard idea. We need to protect an area that's achieved elimination. Now, one of the problems in people's thinking about it is that they think that this has to be forever. And no, the answer is we're opening up travel between countries that have achieved elimination. And progressively, one can open up larger and larger areas that have achieved elimination. The second misconception is that the travel restrictions have to be absolute, hermetically sealed areas. And this is clearly not true. We know that by using import travel restrictions, 14-day organized institutional quarantines, we can prevent outbreaks in the country. And the purpose of that is to enable the normal life, right? Because if we prevent importing of cases, even one, then if one comes in, then we can stop it. But if we allow cases to come in, then they will restart sparks, starting a fire. And in order to allow people to have all of the things that they want to do, like going to bars and restaurants and so on, that's a condition that's like ready for a new fire. We have to make sure that we don't have sparks coming in. So the travel restrictions is something that we have to compromise on. But again, we do not have the choice right now to go back to a pre-pandemic reality. So we have to choose which compromises we want. And for people, the opportunity to do daily life in a normal way is a huge, huge advantage for individual well-being and safety and the ability to engage in family and friends and in economic activity. And indeed, the economic activity has been incredibly harmed. And this was a second major misconception. The conception that we somehow had to trade off the health harm, the disease harm, against the economic harm, and to balance that trade-off by choosing how much to shut down, how much to open up. And what we've seen by analyses of what the consequences are is that it's very clear what should be obvious, which is that if we achieve elimination and can open up back to normal, the economic activity recovers and rebounds and countries that have done this have experienced the least harm from the economy in the world because of the fact that they're living normal social and economic lives. So the fear, and this is a fear that is unjustified, the fear that the economy will be harmed is the wrong concept. Instead, by using a short time, strong action to achieve elimination, one not only prevents much of the death and disease and disability, but one also has the best benefit in terms of economic activity. And this is something that businesses, economists, and over time, governments are beginning to realize was a fundamental mistake at the beginning of the outbreak, creating this misconception of a trade-off. There is no such trade-off. Health and economy go hand in hand. The harm that we experience is because we have the disease in the community. What happens is that if we invest, we have to invest in elimination. The return from the ongoing strong economic activity more than makes up for the economic cost of the elimination process itself. Now, having said that, we have to understand that there are people and companies in a strong action that should be supported, because over a few weeks, over the usual 4 to 6 weeks of achieving elimination, some people need to be supported, and there are even a couple of extra weeks of opening up in a slow way in order to assure that the elimination has been successful. But it's still tremendously less costly, both in terms of economics and, of course, in terms of health, than the long-term yo-yo lockdowns that we're experiencing. Finally, there's been this model of vaccines that will stop the pandemic. And vaccines are an incredibly powerful tool. They're powerful like mass testing, like other strategies for achieving a strong reduction in cases. They're tremendously useful. But when we rely solely on the vaccines, the problem with the long time rollouts of the vaccines, the problem with the increasingly harmful variants, more rapidly spreading, more deadly, and ultimately, we are concerned, deeply concerned, that one of the variants or many of the variants may become vaccine evading. And under those circumstances, the vaccine strategy will be undermined. We will go back to these yo-yo lockdowns. And so we have a choice. This was the choice at the beginning of the pandemic, the choice of closing out the pandemic. So at the beginning, when the virus had not arrived, we could have protected borders for a few weeks, and then the disease would not have arrived. And this is what Taiwan did, and they were able to protect themselves. And then if the disease arrives, then we can do a strong lockdown, a strong action that includes multiple facets. It should include limitation on people meeting each other, because as people breathe out, other people breathe in the virus and become infected, and we surely don't want that. We have to carefully identify cases and isolate people away from home as much as possible, with housemates being quarantined to prevent further transmission, particularly important in high density urban areas where there should be daily checking in with people to make sure that they're not sick, but that they also have what other things they need, whether it's food or support of their psychological or physical well-being. And then once that is being done, and also very careful protection of essential services that we know have to be done by proper ventilation, and if possible, outdoor, short time, and surely no gatherings, so that we can prevent transmission that will go from family to family, infecting many people. So what we want to do is we want to do all of those actions, and the cases will go down very rapidly. Within a few weeks, one can achieve the state that we're all seeking, which is the zero COVID state, the state where we indeed can go to family occasions, restaurants, have open economies, and relax from the stresses of having to protect ourselves and our loved ones from this terrible disease. Now, if we think about all of that, what we realize is most of the action is in the community. It's not a medical action. It's not a government action. What we can do, and this is something that we need to do publicly and clearly, is to communicate with our friends, with our families, with our local communities, that this is something that we can take ownership of and we can do together. And if there is a village that decides to do it, they can achieve elimination by themselves. If there is a larger settlement, a town, a city, small city, they can do it by themselves by making the decision to do it. And we can grow green zone by green zone across the country. It can also be done in neighborhoods of a city. It can be done in a local county or in a small state, or it can be done in major states or across continents. we can collaborate with each other to achieve elimination in as large an area as we can work together to accomplish that goal. So our objective today is to dedicate ourselves to this process of achieving elimination. And that the crazy thing is that as soon as we start to actually do this, it will only take 4 to 6 weeks. The effort that we're facing for the last year is to gain the trust and the respect and the appreciation of our communities, and to galvanize their efforts to recognize that we, the people, have the power to do this. The government can play a surely essential or important role in communicating what can be done and what needs to be done in order to achieve this, and to follow the progress of accomplishing the things so that people can see that it's happening, can recognize that it's on the way, that the goal can be accomplished, and that it's not too late for us to save lives. It's not too late for us to accomplish this goal. The alternative has always been much worse. And we see that without achieving elimination, we are perpetually suffering as individuals, as families, as communities, trying to find ways to protect ourselves as individuals, seeking safety, seeking to reopen the economy, seeking to reopen our society, but not being able to do so because of this terrible disease that is taking such a toll on us and the people around us. And every place that has said, hey, we can ignore this disease. We don't have to do anything. We'll just keep going in our normal lives, has discovered that this is simply not the case, that the disease is way too harmful, way too deadly for people to accept it. And indeed, as people accept it, they discover that the disease becomes worse, the harm becomes greater, and we should not tolerate it. In fact, the tendency to normalize the harm is only perpetuating the harm and causing tremendous damage to our societies and to our economies. So this is the crux of the zero COVID story. The other part of the story that's incredibly important is the global community that we have created to carry this message. We have teams in Scandinavian countries, we have teams across Europe, in Germany and France and Italy and in the UK, but also in many countries, small countries and large countries across Europe, and in countries including India, including Far Eastern countries, and with the help of the experience of New Zealand and Australia, where we have key participants in the effort there, Michael Baker in New Zealand, Stephen Duckett in Australia, and now also across South America, Latin America in general, and in the US and in Canada, there are very strong groups that are advocating and bringing the idea of the zero COVID goal. And there are scientific groups that have now declared clearly that the goal can be achieved, that the way to get there is by the green zone strategy of localized restrictions of communities that achieve elimination, and that we can get there. Is there anything else that you...
Yeah, so I think I'm going to let Björn in very soon, but I think the audience would love to hear a very brief story about your engagement in the Zika virus, not in the Zika, in the Ebola virus epidemic in Africa, where you actually participated, even though the communities were active already, right? When you arrived.
So the story is that I started warning about pandemics 15 years ago based upon mathematical understanding of the incredible change in risk that we were facing from global outbreaks. But when Ebola happened in West Africa, I was involved in policy advice at the highest levels. But like the circumstance that we see today, the government and the UN and WHO did not engage in the prevention of the disease in a way that would be successful. They were using one tool and not a set of tools. And in particular, we realized that it was the community that needed to be the center of the action. And I was put in touch by friends with the people who were on the ground doing the outbreak response effort in the community. And when I asked them about what was going on, and I told them about this idea of the community, they said, "Oh yeah, we just started doing that 3 weeks ago," they told me. And mid-September of 2014, community members went door to door and identified cases early and isolated them. And that's what stopped Ebola. And just to tell you what was the attitude at the time, the predictions that people were making were that there would be millions of people that would die, that the disease would go to burnout, the same idea as the herd immunity idea that has been a false goal in the coronavirus was also the predictions in Ebola in West Africa. And we stopped it with 11,310 deaths. It was 1/10 of 1% of the deaths that were predicted. It was stopped, and we were successful at preventing the tremendous price that others were expecting that would be paid. And that message we carried into the Congo and built community efforts to empower people. The main thing is that the action is a community action. If we think about it as a medical action, we have people in the hospitals. If we think about it as a government action, then the government is worried about what the people will do. Will they agree? Will they not agree? So it has to start with the people recognizing that we want to achieve zero COVID. And with that understanding, both the government and the medical system will serve in the right roles and support the community in achieving elimination.
I'll just tell you, Yaneer, that Björn, more than 10 years ago, wrote a book, Pandemic, and he predicted, just like you did, that there would be pandemics coming up in the future. So, Björn, would you like to comment or add questions? You have to unmute, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Yaneer, for your presentation. Excellent. I have a question regarding flu, because that's my main topic, so to say, and I've been doing research on primarily avian flu for the last 20, 25 years. What do you think, well, regarding future pandemics? And my guess is that it's probably going to be a new flu pandemic I don't know when in the future, but pretty soon, I guess, because we have so many flu viruses circulating, and we have this more and more, let's say, unstable population of domestic animals, humans, and a shrinking amount of biological diversity, and not very many wild birds and so on. So do you think that the zero COVID strategy is applicable also on a future flu pandemic, because it's going to be fast?
That's a very important question. I think that the main thing that we need to start with is realizing that we have a set of capabilities as a humanity that is communicating across the world to respond to dangers, whether they're pandemic dangers or other dangers. And by taking action, we can take control of what will happen to us. And so we can make choices. And this is the most important thing that we're learning, I think, It's the opportunity to make choices that we didn't know that we have. We should not be passive. We should not say, we can accept what will happen, we will tolerate it, we will take the hurt. That's being like a plant. You know, you look at a bush doesn't have the choice to move out of the way, to protect itself. It doesn't have those abilities. An animal has the ability to recognize that there is something that's going to happen, anticipate the harm, and to take action. And the main thing that we have to recognize is that in many of these cases, in pandemics in particular, it is a shared action. And the shared action is very, very different than one person deciding what to do. But in the process of making a shared decision, which we have to learn how to do, we can all take responsibility together for achieving the best outcome. And whether it's a flu pandemic, at one point we would allow to propagate, and we now say, no, we don't want it. Or whether it's a SARS-like disease, like the coronavirus, which has 10 times the harm and terrible long-term consequences, where we know we cannot tolerate it from taking its toll, and therefore we take action. Right now, we simply have to recognize that we have the ability to take control of what will happen. And that's really important, because what we see over and over again is this passivity, the passivity of saying, hey, you know, we don't have the ability to do this, right? This was what we said at the beginning, this error at the beginning, where people said, oh, once it happens, it'll be what it is. And the same thing gets reflected in discussions of seasonality and so on. It's the extrinsic thing, but instead what it's really like is this wrecking ball that's coming and aiming for us. And we're standing there like dumbs, you know, saying, okay, let's see how much it hurts. And instead we can step out of the way and not be harmed. There's an exit strategy from the coronavirus. We can achieve tremendous things, but we have to make choices. And it's the choices that we make collectively that will distinguish our abilities in the future to achieve better existence for ourselves and our families and our communities.